The village was quiet. Ancient, moss-covered stone walls lined the narrow road. Rolling green hills dotted with sheep stretched out in every direction. Joy gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. This was it. Their new beginning.
"You sure about this, Mikkel?" Rock asked from the back seat. He sounded nervous. His cologne, however, was overpowering in the small car. "This place is creepy."
Mikkel, crammed in the passenger seat with maps and brochures spilling onto the dashboard, shot Rock a glare. For the 10th time, yes, cheap land, cheap labor. We've been over this. He jabbed a finger at a brochure, and the guidebook says this village is charming.
Joy chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. Charming, eh? So far, the only locals we've seen are those sheep, and they didn't look too impressed to see us. He steered the car around a sharp bend, the tires crunching on gravel. A weathered sign, barely visible through the mist, came into view. Hotel Safe Full, it read. Below, in smaller letters, vacancies. The hotel wasn't what Joy had expected. He'd pictured something quaint with flower boxes and a welcoming porch swing. Hotel Safeful was a squat rectangular building. The whitewash on its exterior was peeling, revealing patches of grey stone beneath. No flower boxes, no porch swing, just a heavy wooden door with a tarnished brass knocker shaped like a hand.
"Charming," Rock muttered, hauling his suitcase from the trunk. "You sure you booked this place, Mikkel? Looks closed down."
Mikkel ignored him and strode towards the entrance, his steps echoing in the silence. The heavy door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit lobby. Dust motes danced in the air. A fire crackled in a large stone fireplace, casting flickering shadows on the worn furniture. There was no one at the reception desk.
"Hello?" Mikkel called out, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. The only response was the crackling of the fire. Then a voice rasped from the shadows behind the desk. "About time you lot showed up. Thought you'd chickened out." An elderly man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, emerged. He was smoking a thin, pungent cigarette, and his eyes twinkled with amusement.
"You the only one here?" Joy asked, eyeing the old man suspiciously.
The man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. He took a long drag from his cigarette, the tip glowing orange in the dim light. "Guests are scarce this time of year," he said, exhaling a plume of acrid smoke. The old man ignored him, instead shuffling over to a dusty ledger on the desk. He licked a gnarled thumb and flipped through the brittle pages. "Mikkel, was it?" he mumbled, squinting at the faded ink. "S1. Scarce," Rock scoffed. "More like non-existent. You sure this place is even open, old-timer?"
"Yes, that's us. 3 rooms booked online." The old man nodded slowly. "I got your reservation right here. Room 12, 14 and 16. Top floor, best views in the house, or so they say."
He grabbed a trio of tarnished keys from a hook on the wall, the metal clinking together like old bones. "Right then," he said, handing a key to each of them. "Don't be wandering about too late. Place gives me the creeps after dark." He winked, a disturbingly sprightly gesture for someone who looked like he could crumble to dust at any moment.
Their rooms were surprisingly clean, if a little dusty. Heavy curtains blocked out the fading light, and the silence was almost unnerving. Joy unpacked his suitcase, carefully hanging his clothes in the old wardrobe. His throat felt dry. He'd noticed a pitcher of water on the nightstand earlier. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The air was cold, almost damp, and a musty smell hung in the air, like forgotten memories. The only light came from a flickering bulb at the far end of the corridor. Joy shivered. Where were Rock and Mikkel? He hadn't heard a peep from them. He took a step towards the staircase, his footsteps echoing in the silence, and that's when he heard it. A faint tinkling sound like tiny bells or anklets. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound came again, closer this time. It seemed to be coming from the room next to his. Joy hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. What was he doing? He was being ridiculous. It was probably just the keys on his keychain brushing against his leg. He took a deep breath and started to turn away when he heard it again. A soft, mournful sigh just outside his door. Joy whirled around, his blood turning to ice, but there was nothing there. Rock emerged from his room, stretching and yawning.
Man, that nap was exactly what the doctor ordered.
He spotted Joy standing in the hallway, his face pale. Joy hesitated, then shook his head. S1, you okay, buddy? You look like you've seen a ghost. He clapped Joy on the shoulder. S1, it's nothing. Just thought I heard something. Probably just Mickle snoring. The guy sounds like a dying walrus.
Come on, let's go find that old geezer and see if he can rustle up some dinner. I'm starving.
They found the lobby deserted. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. The old man was nowhere to be seen.
Hello? That's strange. Where'd he disappear to? Narrator, Rock called out. His voice echoed in the silence, unanswered. He frowned.
As if on cue, a figure emerged from a door behind the reception desk. It was a woman, her face obscured by the shadows. She moved with a strange, stiff gait, her eyes fixed on a point just beyond Rock's shoulder. Rock began, his voice hesitant. S1, excuse me.
We were wondering if...
The woman remained silent, her gaze unwavering. Rock shifted uncomfortably. There was something distinctly unsettling about her.
I know, it's not exactly the Ritz. But it's just for one night, babe. We'll find somewhere better tomorrow, I promise. Meanwhile, Mickle stood on the balcony outside his room, speaking in hushed tones into his phone. Look, I gotta go. Signal's crap out here. Love you too. Talk soon. He leaned against the railing, gazing out at the view. The village was shrouded in twilight, the rolling hills now dark silhouettes against the fading sky. A light rain had begun to fall, misting the air with a fine spray.
He slipped the phone back into his pocket and took a deep breath of the cool, damp air. The highway snaked its way through the valley below, the headlights of an occasional car cutting through the gloom. As Mickle watched, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance, approaching fast. The car, a dark sedan, was traveling at a reckless speed. Mickle winced, expecting to hear the screech of brakes, the crunch of metal, but there was nothing. The sedan seemed to simply vanish as it reached the point where the road curved sharply around a rocky outcrop. 1 minute it was there, a beacon of light in the gathering darkness. The next it was gone. Mickle blinked, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. Had he imagined it? He scanned the road again, but there was no sign of the car. Rock shivered, a strange chill running down his spine. The woman at the reception desk still hadn't spoken, her gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond him.
We, just wondering about dinner?
He stammered, his voice echoing in the empty lobby. The woman blinked, as if startled, and her head snapped towards him. For a fleeting moment, Rock could have sworn her eyes glowed an unnatural green in the dim light. Then she blinked again, and the effect was gone.
No dinner, not tonight.
And with that, she turned abruptly and disappeared back into the shadows behind the desk. Rock stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Joy, his face even paler than before.
Let's just go back to our rooms. Something isn't right about this place.
Rock nodded, suddenly eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the lobby. Back in his room, Rock tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over him. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the photos he'd taken earlier that day. He stopped at a photo of the hotel exterior, the setting sun casting long shadows across the peeling whitewash. He zoomed in on the image, studying the details, and then he saw it. In the window of his room, a faint, translucent figure. A child, it looked like, its face pale and indistinct, staring directly at the camera.
What do you mean, no dinner?
Mickle demanded, bursting into Rock's room. It's practically still daylight out there.
What's wrong with you two?
Rock just pointed at the phone in his hand. Mickle leaned closer, squinting at the image. He frowned. S1.
Is that a kid in the window?
I didn't see anyone there when I took the picture, he whispered.
Mickle took the phone from Rock, examining the image more closely. He shook his head.
Must be a reflection or something. A trick of the light. Don't go scaring yourselves with ghost stories now. This place is creepy enough without making stuff up.
At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Rock jumped, his heart pounding in his chest. He cautiously approached the door and opened it a crack. It was the old watchman, a lit beady dangling from his lips.
Everything all right in here, lads? You look like you've seen a ghost.
He chuckled at his own joke, but the sound was drowned out by the rising sense of dread in the pit of Rock's stomach. Joy stared out the window, his brow furrowed with worry. Joy as Joy. Did you hear that? He asked, his voice barely a whisper.
Hear what? The banshees wailing. Look, if this is about that photo, Joy as Joy, No, it's not the photo. It's the car. I think it's making a weird noise. The car's probably just cold. It's been sitting out there all day. Anyway, as I was saying, about this photo...
No, I'm serious, Joy insisted, his voice rising in panic. It's like a grinding sound, and the engine won't start. He turned away from the window, his face pale.
Fine, let's go take a look. Maybe we can flag down a passing car and get some help.
He threw open the door and strode into the hallway, Rock and Joy trailing behind him, their faces etched with a growing sense of unease. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with mist, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The three friends huddled around the car, their breath forming wispy clouds in the cold, damp air. Mikkel popped the hood, revealing the car's engine, but even in the dim light it was clear that something was amiss.
I don't get it. It was running fine when we got here.
He slammed the hood shut in frustration.
Great, just great. Now what are we going to do?
Just then they heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. A beat-up tow truck lumbered into view, its headlights cutting through the mist like searchlights. The truck pulled up behind them, and a burly man in greasy overalls climbed out. "You lads are staying at that hotel, aren't you?" Mikkel explained their predicament, his voice laced with frustration. The mechanic listened patiently, nodding occasionally. S5. Trouble, lads?
I know this car. Or at least I know what happened to the last fella who drove it.
He nodded towards the looming silhouette of Hotel Safeful, barely visible through the swirling mist.
That place is cursed, you know?
Mikkel scoffed, trying to mask the tremor of fear that ran down his spine.
You don't understand, lad. This place has a bad history. People say it's built on an old graveyard, that the spirits never left. S2. Cursed? Don't be ridiculous, he said, forcing a laugh. It's just an old hotel. Probably needs a bit of work, that's all.
He took another drag of his cigarette, the tip glowing orange in the darkness.
But what about our car? He asked, his gaze darting nervously between the old man and the shadowy outline of Hotel Safeful in the distance. What happened to it? S5. There's been accidents, lots of them, cars crashing for no reason, people disappearing. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Some say the spirits lure travelers to their deaths.
Hard to say for sure, he replied, exhaling a plume of smoke that swirled around his head like a ghostly apparition. Could be anything, really. But if I were you, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of unseen forces. He paused, his gaze fixed on the hotel. This place has a way of messing with things, with people.
He suddenly wished he'd never agreed to this trip, wished they'd stayed on the main roads, booked into a brightly lit modern hotel with a full staff and a bustling lobby, somewhere safe, somewhere normal. S1, unseen forces, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Narrator. Joy shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around him, as if to ward off the chill that seemed to have seeped into his bones.
Don't listen to him, he snapped, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. He's just trying to scare us, probably hoping we'll pay him double to tow us all the way back to Dublin. He clapped the old man on the shoulder, forcing a grin. Don't worry, we can handle ourselves.
The old man just shook his head, a knowing look in his eyes.
What do you mean, he asked, his mind racing with unsettling possibilities. What are you talking about, S5? Suit yourselves, lads, he said, taking a final drag of his cigarette and flicking the butt into the darkness. But don't say I didn't warn you. This place has a way of getting under your skin, of making you see things, hear things. He paused, his gaze fixed on something just beyond Joy's shoulder. Or maybe you're already seeing them.
The old man just smiled, a slow, unsettling smile that didn't quite reach his eyes.
Let's just say, he said, his voice barely audible above the whisper of the wind through the trees, this place has a habit of holding onto its guests. Some never leave. He turned and climbed back into his tow truck, the engine roaring to life with a sound that echoed through the stillness of the night like a primal scream.
Wait, he shouted, his bravado finally crumbling in the face of the old man's cryptic warnings and the growing sense of dread that hung in the air like the lingering scent of wood smoke. What are we supposed to do? We can't just stay here.
The old man leaned out of the truck window, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights.
You've been warned, lads, he said, his voice a low growl. Get out while you still can. This place, it doesn't like to be disturbed. And with that, he slammed the truck into gear and sped away. the sound of the engine fading into the distance until there was nothing but the silence and the mist and the oppressive presence of Hotel Seyful looming over them like a specter.
They stood there for a long moment, the silence broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the distant barking of a dog. Joy could feel a knot of fear tightening in his stomach. He looked at Rock, who was staring at the spot where the tow truck had disappeared, his face pale and drawn. Even Mikkel, usually the bravest of the three, looked shaken. They were trapped, Joy realized, with a growing sense of dread. Trapped in a place where logic and reason seemed to dissolve like mist in the face of ancient secrets and unseen forces. "We need to get out of here," Joy said, his voice trembling slightly. He turned and started towards the hotel, his legs feeling heavy and leaden, as if an invisible weight had settled upon him. Rock and Mikkel exchanged a nervous glance, then followed close behind, their earlier bravado replaced by a shared sense of unease. As they pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped back into the dimly lit lobby, the air seemed to grow colder, damper, thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something ancient and faintly unsettling. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to a few glowing embers, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls like ghostly apparitions. The reception desk, which had been manned by the unsettling woman earlier, was now deserted. There was no sign of the old watchman, no sound of movement from the rooms above, no indication that they were anything other than completely alone in this desolate, forgotten place.
"Hello?" Joy called out, his voice echoing in the silence, unanswered. The sound of his own voice, thin and reedy in the oppressive stillness, only served to heighten his sense of unease. He looked at Rock and Mikkel, his eyes wide with apprehension. "Where is everyone?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the pounding of his own heart. But there was no answer, only the silence and the shadows and the growing feeling that they had stumbled into something far stranger and far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined.
Mikkel ran a hand through his hair, his face pale in the flickering firelight. "This is insane," he muttered, his voice tight with tension. "Where the hell is everyone?" He slammed his fist on the reception desk, the sound echoing through the empty lobby like a gunshot. "Hey, anyone here?"
The only response was the rustle of wind against the windows and the creak of the old building settling around them. Rock, his usual bravado gone, sank into a dusty armchair by the fireplace, his gaze fixed on the flames as if mesmerized by their dance. He hadn't spoken a word since the mechanic's cryptic warnings, but his silence spoke volumes. Joy paced the length of the lobby, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that they were in grave danger. The mechanic's words, the ghostly figure in the photo, the empty hotel, it all added up to a chilling picture. They were caught in a web of something ancient and evil, and he had the sinking feeling that they wouldn't escape unscathed. Suddenly a sound from outside caught his attention. A rhythmic tapping, like a cane striking cobblestones, accompanied by the shuffle of slow, deliberate footsteps. He rushed to the window, peering out into the mist-shrouded night. A figure was approaching the hotel, silhouetted against the pale glow of the moon. An old man, hunched over a walking stick, his long coat billowing behind him like a shroud. The old man reached the front door and paused, his head tilted as if listening to some silent summons. He raised his hand and rapped on the door, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the lobby like a death knell. Joy hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding against his ribs, then cautiously opened the door a crack.
"You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice a dry, brittle sound like autumn leaves crumbling underfoot.
"This place, it's not safe."
"Not for the living."
"We know," Joy blurted out, his voice tight with urgency. "Our car, it's broken down, we need help." He gestured towards Rock and Mikkel, who were now both staring at the old man with a mixture of fear and desperate hope.
"You won't find help here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This place, it feeds on despair, on fear. It's best to leave, now, before it's too late." "The car is the least of your worries," he said, his eyes dark and fathomless, boring into Mikkel's. "This place, it takes what it wants. It claimed that car long ago, claimed many things, S2. But our car..."
He turned to go, then paused, his gaze lingering on Joy. "There's an old road," he said, his voice barely audible above the howl of the wind. behind the hotel. A path through the woods. Follow it, don't stop, don't look back. And whatever you do, don't listen to the whispers.
We have to get out of here, he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his gut. Now! We'll follow the old man's path. We have to try. Rock and Mickle, their faces pale and drawn in the flickering firelight, nodded in silent agreement. They had to escape the hotel before it claimed them, too.
The old road was little more than a dirt track, barely visible beneath a carpet of dead leaves and gnarled roots. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches intertwined overhead, forming a dense canopy that blocked out the moon and stars, plunging them into an oppressive, almost suffocating darkness. They emerged from the woods, blinking in the sudden glare of headlights. A truck driver, his face a mixture of surprise and apprehension, had stopped on the deserted road, drawn by the sight of three figures stumbling out of the darkness like refugees from a nightmare. They piled into the back of the truck, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. And as the truck rumbled away from the village, leaving Hotel Safeful behind them, a shadowy silhouette against the dawning sky, Joy allowed himself to believe that they were safe, that they had escaped.